Good morning. I'm popping on to remind you about our live call tomorrow at the usual time, Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific time. The link is going to be included in this post. And a reminder, you do need a password now, so make sure you make note of the password I am brave to log on to the call. The real reason for this video, although it is a reminder, is that I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can navigate our emotions during this time. And I realized that in a lot of my recent offerings, I've been encouraging us to feel it all. And it occurred to me that I haven't really spoken to how we go about doing that in a constructive way. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you as a precursor to the call and just as a resource for you in general is some things that I've learned about nervous system regulation and how the experience of feeling our emotions can be done in a manner that is supported by various levels of mindfulness. Awareness of how our nervous system functions can help us to make better choices. Now, when a trauma trigger is activated, it's not always easy to make the choice that we know we need to make in the moment. However, if when we're not in an activated state, we practice shoring up the resources that we'll need to respond to the activated state, we are able to access those resources more readily in time. So I just want to speak to this briefly. Before I go into it, I just want to say that I don't have any direct expertise and training specifically in neuroscience. Everything that I'm sharing with you is my bare bones understanding, what I've learned from my mind-body practice experiences, from my yoga teachers over the years, and specifically I'm referencing some work of a therapist and author by the name of Linda Graham, and also leaning into my experience with my personal therapist in helping me to navigate my anxiety disorder and my attachment imprints and helping me to find new ways of responding to fear-related triggers. So here's the overarching element that I want to share with you, which is really about resilience. And resilience being sort of a measure of our ability to respond to stress and to stimulus that inspires feelings of fear in us. It brings about those feelings. And our level of resilience and how capable we are in responding to things sometimes has to do a little bit with our attitude. So if we are able to lean our thinking in the direction of optimism and see opportunity where there is challenge, that will help in terms of how resilient we become. So reframing our thoughts is important, and it's also not enough. We have to get our neurobiology on board, and how we are able to regulate our emotional responses becomes another key factor in how we respond to stress and the way that our fear and those darker emotions affect us. So the area of our brain that helps us to regulate our emotional responses, all of our responses really, but our emotional responses specifically, is the prefrontal cortex. It's the integrative structure of our brain. It's the most newly evolved portion of the brain that enables us to coordinate the right and the left hemispheres. It helps us to regulate and support resilient response, helps us to sort through the past, the present, and the future, and be in a space of responsiveness in real time. It's the part that helps us become mindfully present. And it specifically helps us to regulate what is called the autonomic nervous system, which you've probably heard about. It's the, automatic, sort of all the automatic mechanisms in the body. It controls our physiological mechanisms like our heart rate and our breath. And it also controls the two systems that you hear people mention from time to time, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. You can think of the sympathetic nervous system as the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic as the brakes. Really simple way of framing them. So when we have a new experience like we're going through right now, or an experience maybe that we're not expecting in life, it is very natural for for the sympathetic branch of the nervous system to mobilize, to just activate. And its job is to do just that, to activate, to mobilize, to meet any challenge or threat that we're facing. That's the sympathetic system's job. It's sort of powered by the amygdala, which is like the alarm center in the brain. It's a really primitive aspect of our brain that perceives a threat. And when it does perceive threat, it releases cortisol. It floods the body with cortisol, which is the stress hormone in the body, and it mobilizes us. It gets us moving when we need to be moving, when we need to be responsive. It's the sympathetic system that kicks into gear. When the amygdala floods us with cortisol and we are disconnected from our prefrontal cortex, we're not able to sort of track and regulate what's going on, the sympathetic can hijack us. We go into what we know as fight, flight, freeze, collapse, all of that. Or as my yoga teacher likes to add on, feed and fornicate. Those are the other two of the 5 F's. So fight, flight, feed, freeze, and fornicate. So when those activations happen, what we want to be able to do, and in time, this is what a therapist, a very skilled therapist, will do with someone who has a trauma response or a trigger response, help to bring online the prefrontal cortex so that then we can call upon the other aspect of the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, to come online and to regulate and help us find what's called our window of tolerance, help us find that center again. And the parasympathetic branch, to speak of that for a moment, is if the sympathetic on overdrive is fight or flight, the parasympathetic is all about rest and digest. It's our rejuvenation response. It's our ability to access states of relaxation, timelessness, blissfulness. It's the place we go when we're in shavasana, just sort of floating off into the gorgeous expanse. So parasympathetic sounds really great, and just like sympathetic, it can go into I'm going to call it a hyperactive state. When there's an over responsive parasympathetic response, and we experience fear when we're in that super relaxed state, and that's our set point, and we have a fear response, it can lead to immobilization, right? So the sympathetic is meant to mobilize. The parasympathetic helps us to remain static. Well, sometimes we need to activate and move our energy in order to process. So when we experience lethargy, numbness, depression, dissociation, withdrawal, avoidance, all of that, that's a over parasympathetic response. So we want to call in the sympathetic system. So essentially, regulation is about our ability to consciously shift through the prefrontal cortex from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic response, and vice versa. Now, I mention all of this not just to educate you and get you thinking about this, but to say that one of the things that I was just recently reading about was the role of oxytocin. So oxytocin is the hormone that surges in us when we that builds and feeds feelings of trust, of bonding and attachment. It's the love hormone. It's the one that surges at the time of orgasm. It also releases when a woman is breastfeeding. It's sort of nature's response to attachment, right, and bonding. Oxytocin has the ability to work as an antidote to cortisol. So cortisol is the stress release, right? So when we're fight or flight, when we feel that surge, the anxiety building, that sensation, high cortisol response in the body, we're in sort of this reptilian brain function. And the thing that can actually help us to steady the sympathetic response and call in the parasympathetic system is our experiences that bring about the sensation, or the hormone, the experience of oxytocin flooding our body. So how do we connect to oxytocin? Well, the ways I mentioned also by feeding the relaxation response in general, which we'll get to that in a minute, but through connection. And so I mention this as we move into the next call to invite you to really lean in to the experience of and the power and the importance of creating bonds, trusting safe spaces where you can show up and feel seen. This will help you build a sort of reservoir and a imprint, a hormonal and an energetic and emotional imprint around this oxytocin sensation, so that when your system goes offline, I'm going to say offline meaning off center, and goes into a hyper sympathetic response, overdrive, that you have some experiences to lean into. Which sort of brings me to the 3 things that I wanted to share with you. How, just to make this less heady and a little more tangible. So I want to offer you 3 ways that we can get and stay connected to the prefrontal cortex and our ability to regulate our autonomic nervous system and to make choices around where we are on and offline in terms of sympathetic response and parasympathetic response. So the first is the one that you're probably hearing the most about now because it's a super timely moment for yoga practitioners and mindfulness experts to flood into our inboxes with their resources. Any sort of mind-body practice is a way to help you cultivate the ability to regulate and shift between the different responses of the nervous system. It helps you to, a yoga practice in particular, moves you in and out of, which is what your brain naturally moves every few hours in and out of, from sympathetic to parasympathetic. In yoga, it's those experiences are created very consciously, and so you literally learn to build that bridge and create that transition. We do that through the breath is one of the primary ways, the postures, there's numerous ways, and I'm going to leave that to the yoga experts to discuss with you. One thing I wanted to mention that you may have felt in the opening moments of our calls when I lead us through the breath exercise, that I keep encouraging us to lengthen the exhale. So what's been shown is that the inhale actually increases the activity in the sympathetic nervous system. Anytime we inhale, the activation of that sympathetic nervous system response. So the gas, right? And then the exhale is the parasympathetic response, is the brake pedal. And I've been inviting before our calls for us to lengthen that exhale, right? To just put the brakes on, to slow things down, to become conscious in that response. So that's one specific tool as it relates to yoga and mindfulness that you can use to kind of explore your connection with these different parts of the nervous system. And there are many, many others. And again, I recommend Britt B. Steele as a yoga resource. And there's lots of others out there. If you Google, you'll find all kinds of people exploring different exercises around this. So you can find someone that you resonate with. The second thing that really can help us to connect to prefrontal cortex is emotional pairing. So in our last call, I talked about psychologically how we can weave together activities, that if we have an activity that we really love doing and we have an activity that not so much, we want to do more, we're not doing it so much. If we pair those 2 activities together, that there can be sort of a bleeding of pleasure. And the thing that, I use the example of when I hike and I want to hike out in the desert a bit longer, that when I listen to things that inspire me while I'm hiking, I hike much longer, and now I look forward to going outside and walking. And we can create that sort of relationship, and the pleasure principle bleeds over into the thing that maybe you feel a little ambivalent about. So we can do the same thing with our emotions. So when we're feeling it all, and we have a really strong emotion, that's one of our darker emotions that brings about a little bit of that tremor within, if we pair it with a more positive emotion, right? A lighter emotion, then we actually train our brain to have emotions that sit alongside each other. So when we have a moment in a live call, for example, and someone shares something that's deeply painful, we obviously hold and make room for that pain. We make room for all that is, and not but, That's important. And we make room for also a sense of gratitude, perspective, love, acceptance. The list goes on. Emotions that support and bring about that oxytocin response, while the negative emotion is still active. We create a pairing. So you can do this within your own life. One of the best ways is to reach out for social support and to find one person or a group of people that can help you to practice that so that you can do it when you're on your own. And this essentially is what a highly skilled therapist does. They sit alongside the pain and they help you to create those pairings, and they rewire your nervous system so that you're able to have two experiences at once and a container that can hold those darker emotions. And then the third thing is what's called empathic attunement. So this is what we do in the Braving Humanity group. We share our experiences, and we have a moment when we're being witnessed and the people around us are able to relate to what's happening for us. And I know most of us have had this experience, whether it's on, the feed or in a group setting, whether it's Braving Humanity or not, in a group setting where someone shares something and you think like, thank you for putting into words the experience that is mine. This is exactly why I love memoir so much, is that I have that experience over and over again. And that brings about that similar response, that parasympathetic, that relaxation, that sense of containing and holding, which helps us connect to the prefrontal cortex. So I'm not explaining that very well. Let's not get caught up in the science. The idea is we have a feeling and we have a container for that feeling. You can call the systems what you will. That's the practice that we're cultivating. Container of a mindfulness practice, the container of coupling our negative emotion with something that feels supportive, and the container of empathic connection and attunement with other individuals who can relate to what we're going through. So I hope that clarifies what I mean when I say feeling it all, and gives you something a little bit more pragmatic to hang your hat on in terms of how I mean to support that. I've certainly not suggesting we get caught in the struggle of the sympathetic nervous system on overdrive, very much the opposite. I'm wanting to encourage and help us connect to that prefrontal cortex and be able to consciously and skillfully activate both aspects of the nervous system and respond in ways that create a sense of both grace and allowance and peace and a larger context. And that's what that prefrontal cortex is for. I'd like to add a little disclaimer here and say that I may not have gotten all the details in terms of the science correct on that. This is just my, again, bare bones understanding. I'm just learning to wrap language around an experience that I've had over the last few years that's helped me to heal deeply. And now that I'm bringing it to my consciousness and understanding it better, it's becoming a really worthwhile tool that's in my toolbox that I can reach for. And that's why I wanted to share the details with you so that you can consciously cultivate these practices as well. So I hope this helped you. I hope that you received some sort of insight or some sort of pragmatic assistance from this video. And if it so moves you, I'd love to see you in the call tomorrow. Of course, never any pressure. This space is for you either way. And if you choose to join us, I will look forward to seeing you. Sending you lots and lots of love. And let's go ahead and do those nice, deep, long inhalations and exhalations together. So sympathetic, we're going to put the gas on. Take a big inhale. And parasympathetic, put the brakes on. Put the brakes on slow. Breath is the doorway into that prefrontal cortex, so stay with it. I love you.